The airport was crowded with people rushing from one gate to another. The sound of rolling suitcases echoed through the large terminal, and voices of announcements mixed with chatter in the air. Everyone was in a hurry, tired or impatient. In the middle of all this, a man in a plain hoodie and jeans stood quietly in line, his head lowered slightly, not wanting anyone's attention. It was Keanu Reeves, though almost no one recognized him at that moment. He moved with calm steps, not carrying himself like a famous actor, but just like an ordinary traveler. He had chosen an economy ticket instead of first class, because he preferred to stay simple, to feel human among humans. As the line moved forward, he offered a polite smile to the staff, quietly gave his boarding pass and walked toward the plane. People around him were arguing about luggage space. Children were crying, and some passengers were already frustrated because the flight was behind schedule. Keanu found his seat without any fuss. He placed his bag carefully under the seat in front of him, then sat down, pulling his hoodie a little tighter. He wanted to disappear into the crowd, to travel without the weight of fame on his shoulders. He glanced around, noticing tired parents with kids, a businessman angrily typing on his laptop, and an elderly woman struggling with her carry-on bag. She tried to lift it up toward the overhead bin, but her hands shook with the effort. Keanu immediately stood up, stepping forward without hesitation. He gently took the bag from her hands, lifted it easily, and placed it in the overhead space. Then gave her a small nod and a kind smile. The woman's eyes filled with relief and gratitude. She whispered, "Thank you, young man," more than once, her voice trembling with warmth. Keanu just nodded again and returned to his seat, not saying anything else, not waiting for recognition or praise. He just did what felt natural. Around him, a few passengers noticed. Some even smiled. One man thought to himself how rare it was to see such simple kindness these days. But still, almost no one realized who this quiet man was. To them, he was just another traveler, someone with gentle manners. In that moment, Keanu looked out the window, watching the sun set in golden streaks over the runway. Planes were lining up for takeoff, and yet their own flight wasn't moving. A soft crackle came from the speaker above. The captain's voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we regret to inform you there will be a delay due to a technical check." The sighs of irritation spread quickly. People shook their heads, some groaned loudly. The businessman muttered angrily about missing his meeting. A child whined for food, and a mother tried to calm him. Keanu stayed still, his calmness like a rock in a storm. He adjusted himself in the seat, pulling out a small book from his bag, its cover slightly worn. He flipped to the page where a paper bookmark rested. While everyone around him complained, he began to read quietly, his face peaceful, as though the chaos didn't touch him. The delay stretched on and people grew restless. One man started arguing with the flight attendant, demanding answers. Another woman asked if she could get off the plane. Voices rose, frustration thickened in the air. Keanu closed his book gently and leaned back, waiting with patience, his eyes drifting toward the elderly woman again. She smiled softly at him, as if comforted by his quiet presence. This was the beginning of the story. A simple flight, an ordinary evening, but it was also the calm before the storm. None of the passengers could have guessed what was about to happen. They had no idea that this ordinary-looking man, the one who had helped a stranger lift her bag, would soon be at the center of a scene none of them would ever forget. And that, one small delay would lead to an unforgettable chain of events. The engines outside stayed quiet. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. The air smelled faintly of coffee from the galley, and the murmurs of the passengers blended together like an uneasy hum. Keanu's eyes remained calm, his hands folded loosely in his lap. But fate was already preparing a twist, the kind of twist that turns a simple trip into a story retold again and again. This was not just another flight. This was the moment where kindness, patience, and one unexpected call would change everything. The minutes passed slowly inside the plane. Passengers shifted in their seats, sighing and checking their watches again and again. The delay felt endless, tension was building in the air, and small arguments began to rise in the middle of this restless crowd. Keanu Reeves stayed calm, his face still gentle, his eyes resting on the window. He seemed unaffected by the frustration around him. Near him, The same elderly woman who had struggled with her bag earlier began to move nervously. She reached up again, trying to pull out a small pouch, her thin arms trembling as she stretched. But the bag was heavy and stuck in the overhead compartment. Her hand slipped, and the pouch nearly fell onto another passenger. A man scowled at her sharply, muttering that she should sit down. Embarrassment filled her eyes. Before the words could sting her more, Keanu stood up, quick but not rushed. His hand reached above her. He gently held the bag steady, and with a small movement freed it from the compartment. He placed the pouch carefully into the woman's lap, his expression soft and respectful, as though this task was nothing, just a natural act. The woman looked up at him with a shaky smile. "Thank you again, young man. You are very kind," she whispered. Keanu smiled back, not wide, but warm enough to comfort her. "It's no trouble," he said softly, his voice low and calm. The people nearby noticed. Some even whispered to each other. They started realizing this quiet man was different from most travelers. Not impatient, not rude, just quietly helpful. Still, no one recognized him for who he really was. The woman slowly opened the pouch. Inside were small medicine bottles, carefully lined. Her hands shook as she checked them. Keanu noticed her struggle. "May I help you open one?" he asked gently. She nodded with relief, and he twisted the cap open with ease, handing it back to her. She drank her medicine, her shoulders relaxing with gratitude. The simple kindness brought tears to her tired eyes. As more passengers watched this scene, the mood around began to soften just a little. One child giggled when Keanu gave him a playful wink. A young mother smiled shyly in appreciation. It was as if his quiet energy was calming the storm in the cabin, even though the delay stretched on. People near him felt less restless. But not everyone was so touched. A flight attendant walked past, her eyes narrowing slightly at Keanu. She thought he was standing too often, moving around when passengers were supposed to remain seated. She didn't see kindness, she only saw inconvenience. "Sir, please sit down and remain in your seat," she said sharply, her tone more scolding than polite. Keanu nodded respectfully, not arguing. He sat back down without complaint, but the woman beside him frowned at the harshness. She whispered, "Don't mind her, you've been more helpful than anyone here." Keanu just smiled softly as though none of it mattered. Minutes turned into another half an hour. The elderly woman dozed lightly after taking her medicine, leaning against her seat with her pouch close to her chest. Keanu kept an eye on her, making sure she was comfortable. He also noticed a young couple arguing about their luggage space, so he stood up again, shifted his own small bag to create room for theirs. His actions were quiet, unseen by most, yet for those nearby, his kindness was impossible to ignore. The businessman who had been angry earlier paused his typing, watching him. Something about Keanu's patience made him lower his voice, his anger fading. It was as if the man's calmness spread like a ripple across the seats. Still, no one suspected he was Keanu Reeves, the famous actor known across the world. He looked too ordinary, too humble, too willing to blend in, and that was exactly how he wanted it. For him, kindness didn't need to be attached to a name. It was just who he was. The elderly woman woke briefly, whispering again, "You remind me of my son, always helping without being asked." Her words were soft but full of emotion. Keanu's lips curved in a small smile, his eyes warm. "Your son must be a good man," he replied kindly. She shook her head, tears in her eyes. "He passed away years ago, but if he were here, I think he would have been like you." Her voice cracked with emotion. Keanu placed his hand gently over hers for just a second, not speaking, just letting the touch give comfort. The woman's tears eased into a smile, her heart lighter because of this stranger beside her. Around them, passengers were beginning to notice more. Some even looked twice at him, thinking his face seemed familiar, but still the hoodie, the quietness, and his humble behavior made them doubt. Who would expect a Hollywood star to sit in economy, helping strangers with bags and medicine? The plane remained still on the runway. The air grew warmer inside, and frustration started to rise again in other rows, but for this little pocket of the cabin, there was calm, One man's simple kindness had shifted the energy. Passengers who were near enough to see him felt less stressed, less angry. This moment was small, yet it carried weight. It showed who Keanu was behind the screen, not the action hero of films, not the celebrity walking red carpets, but a man whose strength came from gentleness, a man who helped when no one asked, who gave without expecting anything in return. What no one realized was that this kindness, this quiet patience was about to collide with an unexpected storm, because not everyone on this flight saw him the same way. For one flight attendant, his calm movements were about to be twisted into trouble, and that misunderstanding would set off a chain of events that would change the entire flight. The cabin lights dimmed as the delay stretched further. People were restless now. Sighs and grumbles filled the air. The elderly woman leaned back in her seat, comforted by Keanu's earlier help. She closed her eyes for a moment. But in the rows behind, a small storm was starting to build. A flight attendant walked briskly down the aisle, her face tight with irritation. She noticed Keanu had once again stood up, this time to shift his small bag so another family could fit theirs. He moved quietly, helping them with a polite nod. But to her, it seemed like he was ignoring rules. "Sir, I told you already, stay seated," she snapped, her voice loud enough for a few rows to hear. Passengers turned their heads, watching curiously. Keanu gave a small nod. "Of course," he said calmly, his voice low and respectful. He returned to his seat without protest, but the attendant's sharp tone lingered in the air. The family he helped looked uncomfortable, whispering their thanks under their breath. The businessman nearby muttered, "He was just helping." But he said it quietly, not wanting to get involved. The young mother with her child gave Keanu an apologetic smile, as if silently telling him not to worry. Keanu himself showed no sign of irritation. He simply leaned back, folded his hands, and kept silent. But the flight attendant was not done. She returned a few minutes later with a stern look. She asked for his boarding pass. Passengers blinked in surprise, wondering what was happening. Keanu pulled the pass from his pocket and handed it over, his movements unhurried, respectful. She studied it, then frowned deeper. "This is the wrong seat," she said sharply. "You're sitting where you don't belong." Her voice cut through the cabin, and people nearby frowned in confusion. Keanu raised his brows slightly, not defensive, just calm. "I believe this is my assigned seat," he said gently. The attendant shook her head, tapping her pad with force. "No, you're in the wrong section. You'll need to move immediately." The elderly woman stirred awake, looking confused. "No, he's supposed to be here," she said weakly. "He helped me with my bag. This is his seat." But the attendant dismissed her words with a stiff smile. "Ma'am, please don't worry. We'll handle this." Passengers began whispering. A few checked their tickets, one man said under his breath. "They always make mistakes with seating, but why make such a scene?" Still, no one spoke too loudly. No one wanted trouble. Keanu, however, remained calm. He gently took the pass back, looked at the number, then looked at the seat he was in. It matched perfectly. "This is indeed the seat assigned to me," he said politely, his voice steady, not challenging, simply factual. The flight attendant's cheeks flushed with irritation. Maybe she had made a mistake. Maybe her pride wouldn't let her admit it. Instead, she raised her voice slightly. "Sir, I don't want to argue. You'll have to step aside until this is sorted." Gasps rippled through the nearby rows. The businessman frowned. The mother hugged her child closer. Even the elderly woman shook her head in disbelief. "He did nothing wrong," she whispered. Keanu stood up slowly. He didn't want to make the scene worse. "If you need to check, I'll wait," he said softly, his hand steady as he lifted his small bag. But to the passengers, the picture was troubling. Here was a man who had only shown kindness, who had helped others without complaint, being treated like a rule breaker. Whispers grew louder. "Why? Are they targeting him?" He was just sitting quietly. "This doesn't make sense." The attendant motioned for him to step into the aisle. Her voice clipped. "Please wait here until security arrives." At that word, security, the mood in the cabin shifted. People exchanged shocked looks. "Security for what?" someone whispered. Another man shook his head in disbelief. They're blowing this out of proportion. Keanu didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice or protest. He simply stood calmly in the aisle, his bag held loosely in one hand, his other hand resting at his side, his face peaceful, almost too calm for the rising tension around him. The elderly woman reached for him, her voice trembling. "Please, he did nothing wrong. He was kind. He helped me." Her words were ignored by the attendant, who now radioed in for assistance. The businessman closed his laptop with a snap, frustration on his face. "This is ridiculous," he muttered louder this time. A few passengers nodded in agreement, but still, no one had yet realized who he really was. To them, he was just a quiet man in a hoodie being unfairly singled out. Still, some passengers began to look more closely. His face seemed familiar, his calmness unusual. One young man whispered, "Doesn't he look like—" But his voice trailed off, unsure. The plane was no longer restless just from delay. Now it was tense, heavy, filled with unease. Passengers leaned forward in their seats, their eyes following the scene. Some pulled out their phones discreetly, recording in case something happened. Keanu stood in silence, waiting. His posture, straight but relaxed, not challenging, not defensive, just patient. It was as if he knew that fighting would only make things worse. His calmness was striking, almost unnatural in the middle of this storm. This was the turning point. The moment the kindness of one man began to clash with the misunderstanding and pride of another. The whispers in the cabin were growing louder, questions rising in every direction. Who was this man? Why was he being treated this way, and why did his face seem so familiar? What the passengers didn't know was that this quiet man, treated like a nuisance, was someone the world admired, and very soon the truth would come crashing into the room like a wave, shaking the airline, the crew, and everyone who witnessed it. The aisle felt heavy with silence as Keanu stood there, his bag in one hand, his calm face a strange contrast to the storm of whispers filling the cabin. The flight attendant's voice had already turned sharp, and now her decision had brought insecurity. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, some leaning into the aisle to watch, others holding up their phones, ready to record. 2 airport security staff arrived, their uniforms neat, their steps firm. They looked around quickly before their eyes settled on Keanu. The flight attendant spoke first, her tone clipped. "This passenger refuses to cooperate. He is sitting in the wrong seat and causing disruption." Her words were strong, her voice full of authority. Passengers gasped softly. Many knew it wasn't true. They had seen everything. They had watched him sit quietly, help others, and never raise his voice. Keanu, however, did not defend himself immediately. He simply nodded respectfully at the officers. "Gentlemen, I believe there is a misunderstanding," he said softly, his voice calm. The first officer asked for his boarding pass. Keanu handed it over. The man studied it, frowned slightly, and then looked at the seat number. It matched perfectly. He glanced at the flight attendant, clearly puzzled, but the attendant stood firm. He was moving about when he was told not to. He was refusing instructions. "This behavior cannot be tolerated," she insisted, her tone growing louder as if trying to convince not only the officers but herself. Passengers murmured, some shaking their heads. An old man near the back muttered nonsense, he was helping people. The elderly woman, her voice weak but determined, spoke again. "This man helped me. He has done nothing wrong." Her words trembled, but her courage was strong. Keanu stood in silence for a moment. Then he spoke quietly. "If it makes things easier, I will step off the plane." His tone was even, no bitterness, no anger. His choice shocked the passengers. Gasps spread across the rows. The businessman muttered, "He shouldn't have to leave. This is absurd," a young mother whispered to her child. "See, that man is kind even when others are not." The officers exchanged looks. One of them asked, "Sir, are you sure you have the right seat?" Keanu gave a small nod, his eyes calm. "Sometimes peace is worth more than pride," he said softly. The words simple, but they carried weight. Without another argument, he picked up his bag and began walking slowly down the aisle. The passengers' eyes followed him. The tension in the air was thick. Some pulled out their phones openly now, recording every second. The businessman shook, his head angrily. "This is shameful. The elderly woman whispered a prayer under her breath, her hands trembling as she watched the man who had helped her being treated unfairly. Keanu's steps were steady, his head slightly bowed, his presence quiet. But in that silence there was dignity. He wasn't pushed. He wasn't dragged. He walked out by choice, his calmness making the entire situation even more powerful. As he reached the door, he turned slightly, gave a small nod to the passengers, who had watched, then stepped off the plane. The door closed behind him with a heavy sound and the cabin erupted into whispers. Passengers leaned toward each other, their voices urgent. He didn't do anything wrong. Why did they make him leave? Did you see how calm he was? I think I know him. His face looks familiar. Some began to pull up pictures on their phones, comparing them secretly. Inside the terminal, Keanu walked slowly, his bag over his shoulder, security staff beside him. One of them finally asked, "Sir, do you want to file a complaint? You were treated unfairly." Keanu shook his head gently. "No, I just want to continue my journey. No need for trouble." His voice was quiet, carrying no anger, only acceptance. Back on the plane, tension still filled the air. The elderly woman wiped her eyes, whispering to the young mother beside her, "He was so kind. Why did they send him away?" The mother sighed. "People sometimes don't see the truth." The businessman spoke louder, his voice sharp. "This will not end well for the airline. Someone recorded everything." The first whispers of recognition began. One passenger gasped softly, showing her phone to her friend. "Look, that's him, that's Keanu Reeves." Her voice trembled with disbelief. Her friend leaned in, eyes wide. "You're right. Oh my God, that's really him." The news spread like fire across the cabin. People were stunned, shocked that the man they had just seen forced off the plane was one of the most beloved actors in the world. The irony cut deep. The airline had just thrown out not only a kind man, but a global star known for humility and generosity. The passengers exchanged looks of disbelief, some angry, some guilty for not speaking louder when they had the chance. A young man whispered, "They didn't just make a mistake. They made the worst mistake." Keanu, outside in the terminal, didn't look back. He moved with the same quiet dignity. Walking away from the scene, his phone buzzed softly in his pocket, but for now he didn't answer. He just wanted peace. Little did the airline know that this moment, recorded on multiple phones and whispered across social media, would soon explode into a storm they could never control. The stage was set. The passengers were stunned. The world would soon know what had happened, and the one man who walked away silently, with no anger, no complaints, would soon turn the tables with just one call. The plane door had closed behind Keanu, but inside the cabin the silence was heavy. Passengers looked at each other with confusion and disbelief, many still whispering about what they had just seen. The elderly woman wiped her eyes again, shaking her head. "He did nothing wrong," she murmured, her voice trembling. The businessman slammed his laptop shut in frustration, muttering loudly, "Ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous." Children asked their parents what happened, and parents struggled to explain. Then it started slowly, with one young man scrolling through his phone. He had recorded part of the scene. His hands shaking with adrenaline, he replayed the video and froze. His mouth opened slightly. "Wait a second," he whispered to the woman beside him. He pulled up a picture online, comparing it carefully. His eyes widened. "Oh my God. That's Keanu Reeves," he said under his breath. The woman leaned in, gasped, then quickly covered her mouth, her eyes wide. "Are you sure?" she whispered. The young man nodded firmly. "Look at the face, the eyes. It's him, I swear," he whispered back. He began showing others, passing his phone down the row. The whispers spread like wildfire. "That man they threw off. It was Keanu Reeves." "You're kidding." "No, look. It really was him." Within minutes, more passengers were searching on their own phones, pulling up photos and clips, comparing them with the man they had just seen quietly helping an elderly woman, calmly leaving the plane without complaint. The recognition hit hard. Disbelief turned into shock. Shock turned into anger. They threw Keanu Reeves off the plane. Someone muttered loudly, heads turned, murmurs grew. Social media came alive almost instantly. A passenger uploaded the short clip, tagging the airline. The caption read, "They just kicked Keanu Reeves off our flight for no reason. He was calm, kind, and polite. What a shame." Within minutes, likes and shares began climbing. Hashtags started forming. Even before the plane had moved from the runway, the story was already spreading beyond the cabin. Inside, the atmosphere shifted. The elderly woman gasped when a passenger leaned over to tell her, "Do you know who that kind man was? That was Keanu Reeves." Her mouth opened in surprise, tears filling her eyes. "No wonder," she whispered. "No wonder his heart was so gentle." The businessman cursed under his breath. "This airline has no idea what they've just done." The flight attendants exchanged nervous looks. They began to hear the whispers too. One of them leaned toward the other, whispering, "They're saying it was Keanu Reeves." The other shook her head in disbelief. "Impossible." But the worry in her eyes betrayed her doubt. The passengers no longer stayed quiet. Frustration rose. "You threw out Keanu Reeves. He was sitting in his right seat. He helped that old woman." The voices grew stronger. The young mother rocked her child gently, her eyes filled with both sadness and admiration. "He was so patient. He didn't argue, even when treated unfairly," she whispered to another passenger. "My little boy saw him help me with my bag. That's the kind of example children need," she said softly. At the back of the plane, a group of teenagers were excitedly posting clips online, laughing with disbelief. "Dude, this will blow up. Keanu Reeves on our flight, kicked off for nothing." Their voices mixed with the shock and anger of the adults. The story was no longer just in the cabin. It was already racing across the internet. Meanwhile, outside in the terminal, Keanu walked with the same calm steps, his bag slung over his shoulder. He didn't show frustration or anger. He simply moved forward. His phone buzzed with messages. News was already spreading faster than he could imagine. Strangers online defending him. Fans outraged. Hashtags climbing higher. Inside the cabin, realization turned into regret. Passengers who had stayed silent earlier now felt guilty. "We should have spoken up louder," one man whispered. "We all saw he did nothing wrong." Another woman shook her head. "But he was so calm, he didn't even let it become a fight. Maybe that's why no one shouted." The elderly woman, still clutching her pouch, whispered softly, "He was treated unfairly, but he left with grace. That is real strength." Her voice shook, but her words touched the people around her. Many nodded, feeling the truth in her simple statement. As the plane finally began to move, preparing for takeoff, the passengers' hearts weren't calm. They knew they had witnessed something wrong, something unfair, and something that would not stay hidden. The man who had been thrown off their flight was not just another passenger. He was Keanu Reeves, a man known for kindness, humility, and generosity, a man loved by millions. And now he was at the center of a storm that was about to fall directly on the airline. The whispers turned into conversations, conversations into frustration. Phones lit up with notifications as social media feeds exploded. People shook their heads in disbelief. The young man who had first recognized him smiled grimly at his screen. "The world knows now," he said quietly, his words carrying both satisfaction and sorrow. In that moment, everyone understood that this was no longer just about a delay or a misunderstanding. It was about how a man of kindness was treated, and how quickly truth can spread in a world always watching and waiting. The truth had spread inside the cabin. It had spread to phones, to posts, to the world outside. The storm had begun, and the airline had no idea what was about to hit them. Outside, the plane, the terminal was quieter, but inside Keanu's heart there was no anger. He walked with calm steps, his bag resting lightly on his shoulder. He had just been humiliated in front of dozens of passengers, thrown off a plane for no real reason, yet his face showed no bitterness. His mind was steady instead of rage. There was only a simple thought: how to move forward. He sat down in one of the chairs near the gate, his hoodie pulled close, trying not to attract attention. People were staring already, some whispering, some daring to take photos, but Keanu ignored them. He looked at his phone, dozens of messages popping up, notifications buzzing endlessly. Social media was already burning with what had happened. Strangers were defending him. Fans were outraged. But Keanu's fingers didn't rush to type angry words. He didn't plan to release a furious statement. Instead, he scrolled slowly, then paused. He thought not of himself, but of others. A few passengers had also been removed earlier because of overbooking. Mothers with tired children, workers who were desperate to reach their jobs. Those people were stranded too, he remembered, their disappointed faces as they walked off before the plane even filled. And that thought gave him direction. He dialed a number, not a lawyer, not a manager, not even a reporter. The call was to an old contact he trusted, someone who could arrange transport quickly, someone who had worked with him before, when he helped stranded travelers. His voice was calm when the person answered. "Hey, I need a bus arranged. There are people stuck here who need to get to the same city. Can we do it tonight?" The person on the other end hesitated, surprised, but then agreed quickly. Within minutes, Keanu was in motion. He walked to the waiting area, where some of those stranded passengers sat with tired eyes. They looked up, not fully realizing yet who he was, just seeing a quiet man approaching. "Are you all headed to Los Angeles?" he asked softly. A few nodded. "Yes, but our flights got canceled. We don't know what to do," one mother said. Rocking her child gently, Keanu smiled kindly. "Don't worry, I've arranged a bus. It'll take you all there tonight." Shock spread across their faces. "A bus," one man repeated. "But who paid for it?" Keanu's smile deepened slightly. "Don't worry about that, just come along, it's taken care of," he said calmly. No pride in his voice, no boasting, just a simple offer of kindness. The passengers looked at each other. In disbelief, slowly their faces softened, gratitude filling their eyes. One woman whispered, You're Keanu Reeves, aren't you?" He nodded lightly. "Yes, but right now I'm just someone who doesn't want you to be stranded." His tone was humble, steady. He helped them gather their things, carrying bags, smiling at children, making sure no one was left behind. News began to spread inside the terminal too. More people were recording now, sharing videos online, captions like, "Keanu Reeves kicked off flight, now helping strangers get home," and airline threw him out. He's still thinking of others. The post spread even faster than before. Thousands of people liking, sharing, commenting about his humility. Back inside the plane, passengers were receiving updates through their phones. Whispers grew louder. "He's helping stranded travelers. He arranged a bus for people stuck." The businessman who had defended him earlier shook his head with a small smile. "While they're in here trying to save face, he's out there actually saving people's night." The elderly woman clutched her pouch tighter, whispering softly, "What a soul. What a good man." Keanu walked with the group of stranded passengers out to the bus terminal, the night air cool against his skin, the city lights glowing in the distance. The bus pulled up just as he had arranged, its headlights shining warmly. He helped people climb aboard, making sure the elderly got the front seats. Mothers with children had space, and everyone was settled. He even bought snacks and drinks from a nearby shop, handing them out with quiet smiles. One young man hesitated before boarding. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his eyes wide with confusion. Keanu looked at him, his voice simple. "Because kindness costs nothing, but it means everything to someone who needs it." The word struck the young man deeply. He nodded slowly, climbing aboard, repeating the line under his breath as if it were a lesson. Back at the airport, the airline's executives were scrambling. The story was blowing up online. Headlines already forming, their customer service lines jammed, the name of their company trending in the worst way possible. But out here, away from the noise, Keanu was not worried about the storm. His focus was on making sure these people reached their homes safely. He stepped onto the bus last, settling in quietly among the others. He didn't sit at the front like a leader. He chose a simple seat near the middle, pulling his hoodie back a little, smiling faintly as he listened to the chatter of the relieved passengers. They were laughing softly now, their fear gone, their hearts lighter. For Keanu, this wasn't about revenge against the airline. It wasn't about proving a point. It was simply about turning a wrong moment into something right. About giving hope when the night felt heavy. And though he never said it aloud, he knew one truth. One act of kindness could travel farther than anger ever could. As the bus pulled out of the station, rolling into the night toward the city, Keanu leaned his head against the window, his eyes calm, his mind at peace. Outside, the storm of media and outrage was only growing. But inside the bus, there was only warmth, only gratitude, and only the quiet power of one man's choice to be kind. Inside the airline headquarters, phones rang non-stop. The sound of chaos filled the offices. Customer service lines were flooded with angry calls. People demanded answers. And the story of Keanu Reeves being thrown off a plane was already spreading like fire across the internet. Hashtags were trending worldwide. News channels picked up the video clips, showing him quietly leaving the aircraft, helping others in the terminal, arranging a bus for stranded passengers. Executives sat around a long table, their faces pale, sweat on their foreheads. One manager slammed his tablet down. "This is everywhere, do you understand? Everywhere," he shouted. The others looked at their screens, scrolling through endless posts, thousands of comments. How could they do this to Keanu Reeves? He's the kindest man alive, and they threw him off. "I'll never fly this airline again." The outrage grew by the second. One executive muttered, "If it had been anyone else, maybe it would not explode like this, but Keanu Reeves, he's beloved, he's respected, this will destroy our image." Another slammed his hand on the table. "Fix it, we need a statement. We need to reach him immediately." Panic filled the room. They knew their brand was collapsing in real time. Meanwhile, flight attendants on the plane whispered nervously among themselves. The one who had ordered him off the flight tried to stand firm, but the weight of realization showed in her eyes. She overheard passengers talking louder now. It really was him. He was so polite. They humiliated Keanu Reeves. The words cut through her confidence. Her hands shook slightly as she served drinks. The passengers inside the plane were restless, some angry, some stunned, many still glued to their phones, reading updates. The businessman who had been frustrated earlier leaned across the aisle, telling others, "The airline is already in trouble, look at the news." He held up his screen, showing headlines flashing with Keanu's name. The elderly woman wiped her eyes and whispered softly, "Justice will come." At the same time, journalists were rushing to airports trying to catch the story live. Reporters called the airline non-stop, their inboxes filled with questions. Why was Keanu Reeves removed? What rules did he break? But there were no good answers. There was no justification. Back at the headquarters, one executive finally said, "We need to apologize, and not a simple one. We need to beg for forgiveness. This could ruin us." Another interrupted, "But if we admit fault, it will cost millions in lawsuits." The room filled with argument, voices clashing, but in the end they all knew there was no choice. Keanu's quiet dignity had already won the public. No defense could protect them. Meanwhile, Keanu sat quietly on the bus with the stranded passengers. He didn't even check the chaos exploding online. He was listening to a child telling a funny story, laughing softly, passing snacks around. The people around him relaxed, forgetting for a moment the trouble they had faced. Outside the windows, the night stretched on, calm and endless. Inside the bus, there was warmth and comfort. But online, the storm grew. Celebrities began posting too. Famous actors, singers, and ordinary fans defended him. This is why Keanu Reeves is loved. He gets thrown off a plane and still helps others. One tweet read, another said, "The airline messed with the wrong person, the kindest man alive." The comments turned into global headlines. By the time the airline executives drafted a statement, it was too late. The damage had already been done. Their shares began to drop. Investors panicked. News anchors spoke of the event with shock. "Imagine kicking Keanu Reeves of all people off a plane," they said. The story dominated screens across countries. Inside the bus, one of the passengers showed Keanu his phone. "Sir, look. The world is defending you. You're trending everywhere." Keanu glanced at the screen, gave a small smile, and shook his head. "I'm not interested in trending," he said softly. "I'm just glad you all are getting home safely." His humility touched everyone around him. Tears filled the elderly woman's eyes again. "You are rare, very rare," she whispered. Keanu gave her hand a gentle squeeze. At the headquarters, panic turned to desperation. "Call him," one executive barked. "We need to speak with him, offer him compensation, anything." Assistants dialed numbers, trying to reach his agent, his manager, anyone. But Keanu didn't answer. He wasn't hiding. He simply didn't care to argue. He had already moved on. The panic spread down to the employees, too. Customer service workers were yelled at by angry callers. Airports filled with people demanding refunds. Social media campaigns urged travelers to boycott the airline. The executives knew they were trapped. One mistake, one act of pride from a single flight attendant had now become a global disaster. On the plane, the passengers were restless until landing. When they finally reached their destination, many shook their heads in disbelief. Some spoke to reporters waiting outside, telling them what they had witnessed. He was polite, he was calm, he helped people, and they threw him out. One man said, he didn't raise his voice, he didn't argue, he walked out quietly. And now we all feel ashamed we didn't stop it. Their voices only added to the wave of outrage. The airline tried to release an official apology later that night, but it was too late. The words sounded empty, written with fear rather than honesty. The public was not ready to forgive. Keanu didn't respond to their statement at all. His silence was louder than any words. The world admired him more because he chose kindness over anger, dignity over revenge. The panic in the airline boardroom deepened, but out on the road, Keanu sat quietly as the bus rolled into Los Angeles. The passengers thanked him one by one, shaking his hand, hugging him, tears in their eyes. For them, he was not a star. He was a stranger who cared, a man who gave when no one asked, and that act meant more than any apology from an airline ever could. The night was deep and calm when the bus finally reached Los Angeles. The headlights cut across the dark roads, and the city lights sparkled in the distance. Inside the bus, the passengers were quiet now. Many were tired, but there was also a warm feeling among them. They had not just reached their destination, they had been carried there by the kindness of one man. Keanu Reeves sat among them, his hoodie pulled back slightly, his face calm, listening quietly to the soft chatter. When the bus stopped, the passengers slowly gathered their things. One by one they came to him, thanking him with words that shook with emotion. A mother hugged her child close and whispered, "Because of you, we made it. Thank you for thinking of us." Keanu smiled gently, nodding. "Take care of each other," he said. A young man shook his hand tightly. "You didn't have to do this, but you did. I'll never forget it." Keanu only smiled again, saying softly, "Kindness makes the world lighter." The elderly woman he had helped back on the plane held his hand with trembling fingers, tears in her eyes. "You reminded me of my son tonight. I'll pray for you every day." Keanu leaned slightly closer, his voice soft. "Thank you, ma'am. Your words mean more than you know." He carried her small bag down from the bus himself, making sure she stepped safely onto the pavement. After everyone left, Keanu stood quietly by the side of the road, the cool night air brushing against his face. His phone buzzed nonstop in his pocket. He finally glanced at the screen. Hundreds of messages, calls, and news alerts. The story had gone everywhere. Reporters wanted his comment. Agents wanted to respond. The airline had issued an apology and begged to speak with him. But Keanu just sighed softly, slipping the phone back into his pocket. He walked a few steps away, his bag slung over his shoulder. A small group of reporters spotted him at last, cameras clicking rapidly, microphones pushed toward him, voices calling out, "Keanu, what do you have to say about being thrown off the plane? Are you going to sue the airline? How do you feel about their apology?" The questions were sharp, demanding, heavy. Keanu stopped for a moment, his face calm as always. He looked at the crowd of cameras, his voice quiet but steady. I don't want to attack anyone, mistakes happen. What matters is how we treat each other when things go wrong. His words were simple, but they carried weight. The reporters leaned in, stunned by the humility in his tone. He continued, "Tonight I saw people stranded, tired, and worried, and I just wanted to help them get home, that is all." One reporter pressed. "But you were humiliated. They treated you unfairly." Keanu gave a small nod, his eyes soft. "Maybe, but anger would not change that. Kindness always does more than anger ever could." Then he smiled faintly, lifting his bag higher on his shoulder. "I'm grateful to the people who shared smiles with me today, and I hope tomorrow we can all choose to be a little kinder." Without waiting for more questions, he walked away, leaving the reporters stunned. The next morning, the world woke up to his words. Every news channel played the clip. Every headline praised his calmness. Keanu Reeves responds with grace. The kindest man in Hollywood proves it again. Thrown off a plane, still helps strangers. People everywhere shared his story, not just because of the injustice, but because of the way he responded, with patience, humility, and kindness. The airline's apology looked small compared to his simple words. Their statement was filled with excuses and promises, but his response was only human, honest, and kind. Millions of people around the world sided with him, not because he was a celebrity, but because he showed the world what it meant to stay gentle even when treated unfairly. In coffee shops, offices, and homes, people talked about him. Parents told their children about his actions. Teachers used his words in classrooms. "Kindness does more than anger," they repeated. Strangers on social media posted about small acts of kindness they chose to do because of his example. The passengers who had been on the flight spoke to news channels too, their voices strong. "We saw him. He helped us. He never raised his voice, he left quietly. He was treated wrong, but he walked with dignity." Their stories only made the admiration grow. The elderly woman who had been helped by him gave a short interview, her eyes wet with tears. "He helped me like a son. I'll never forget that." Her words touched hearts everywhere. For Keanu, however, life moved on quietly. He didn't chase the headlines. He didn't sit for long interviews. He didn't demand lawsuits or money. He simply returned to his normal routine, living simply, helping quietly. His silence only made the world love him more. People admired that he didn't need to shout. He just lived the truth. By the end of the week, the story had become more than just a flight incident. It had turned into a lesson. People repeated it as an example of humility, of dignity, of choosing peace over pride. One mistake by an airline had shown the world once again why Keanu Reeves was not just a star on screen, but a star in life. And so the story closed not with anger, not with revenge, but with kindness. A reminder that true strength is not in shouting the loudest, but in walking away with grace, helping others along the way, and leaving behind a light that people will never forget.